And we are live.
Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. This is the final webinar in our September series titled Embracing Video Games for Interest-Powered Learning. My name is Paula Esquadra. I am the Digital Marketing and Communications Manager for Glass Lab, and I'll be your host for today. Throughout this month on Connected Learning TV, we've been diving into really deep conversations around leveraging video games for high-impact learning. So today we'll be chatting specifically about some ways that parents can get on board with game-based learning while creating safe spaces of environment and empowerment that allow them to learn alongside their kids. Before we dive into our chat, though, let's go over a couple of really quick details. To those of you watching live right now, we welcome your comments and questions either via the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning or via the Google Plus event page. We'll do our best to address your questions here in the Google Hangout. We'll also be chatting throughout the month in the Connected Learning Google Plus community and using the same Connected Learning hashtag on Google Plus. I'd like to give our guests a chance to briefly introduce themselves. Kurt Squire, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Kurt Squire. I'm a co-director of the Games Learning Society Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a professor in education.
Great to have you here. What interests you about game-based learning?
I've been kind of working off and on in this for almost like 15, 20 years now. My main interest, I guess, has always been how if games are kind of one of my core, I guess, drives has been that if games are kind of the entertainment medium or how we think about interactive media on the computer, or one way or a primary way, then a lot of my work's been trying to understand, can you use those for learning, under what conditions can they be used best, and so on.
That sounds great. MJ, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Michael John, or MJ, as Paula calls me, and I'm the game director at Glass Lab, where we make and enable games for learning. And I'm also the father of a 12-year-old girl who loves to play games. Very
cool. Vivian, would you like to go next?
Hello, I'm Vivian. I'm a Canadian expat living in Switzerland for the moment. I have 4 children between the ages of 10 and 18, 1 girl and 3 boys. And I'm an educator by profession. I teach in private international schools. And I just finished a graduate certificate looking at education technology integration in the classroom, and then also halfway through a Master's of Science looking at that same thing, and I run an after-school coding club, so I'm happy to be here.
Oh, cool.
Very cool. And we have one more guest speaker named Constance. She's the Professor of Education and Game-Based Learning at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So if she has a chance to join in a bit, then we'll give her some time to give her an intro. So without further ado, let's dive in. So what has been traditionally considered as powerful learning experiences in the past? Anything from making posters to models, like the STATES project, and how have learning opportunities kind of evolved in the digital era?
Well, I can speak to that. 20 years ago when I first started in education, the big buzzword was Writer's Workshop, and I think we're still doing Writer's Workshop with maybe different names. And at that time, it was really considered authentic learning because kids could write their own stories, and I loved letting my kids write whatever they wanted to write about, science fiction, mystery, whatever, because I'm a writer and I am excited about writing, and I love seeing them being excited about writing. And at that time, we would publish our stories by using nice colored pens on colored paper and slipping in a binder. And then we would love that binder. We would all read it and pass it around, and that was considered pretty amazing back then and quite radical. And now, 20 years later, we still have Writer's Workshop, but now things are different. Kids are publishing to ebooks and selling them through iTunes, raising money for charity, and becoming really real authors because they have the entire world, global audience for their work. So that's a big change, and all due to technology.
Yeah. So if you look back, kind of there's a couple of things. Like, I guess all of history, it's everything is kind of the same, but also everything's different. It's continuity and change. I think the continuity kinds of things you see going back to like even the 70s and a lot of the game-based stuff coming out of then is that games seem to work most powerfully when they are integrated in an overall kind of learning system, when they work along with other media They're very good at raising interest in a topic. And assessing the kind of learning that's happening through games is kind of a perennial challenge. Those things are all kind of the same, I think. I think some of the things that have changed is that we now have learning materials, particularly games, that are really designed to be tied to standards and work in classrooms and do things like push the boundaries of assessment in ways that we did not have 20 years ago. So I think those are all kind of new themes. And I think hopefully something we'll talk about too is that this will always continue to evolve. So I think that as a generation of kids that grows up like playing Minecraft starts building learning games, they're going to be amazing.
So I have kind of a fun story I was thinking about while you guys were talking. So I don't know, last spring my daughter was doing a report. She had to do the classic school report, and it kind of, the way she chose to do it, which she had a little bit of help from her dad, kind of encapsulates all this stuff, which is, first of all, she chose to do a report on important women in the history of computing. So it was Ada Lovelace and Grace Hopper and these kind of pretty remarkable characters. And then she chose to present that through an RPG where the player would wander through a space and meet these characters, and they would say a little bit about their lives and what they did around computing. And she built this with a piece of software called RPG Maker. And I had no idea how to use it, and so she used YouTube tutorials to teach herself how to use it, which is this sort of like whole picture of how kids can learn using these modern digital tools that's just so different and new, but completely natural to kids.
That is phenomenal. I didn't know that. It's very exciting. So you've all brought up the idea of like an authentic learning experience and how that has shifted over time, but that game-based learning has always kind of been in the continuum of curriculum and activities and things like that. So how would you characterize the view of using video games for learning from a parent's perspective? And has there been a positive shift in the past few years, or is there still a lot of work that has to be done to kind of create an understanding with it?
I've seen a huge shift. I mean, among parents and kind of colleagues. I mean, when I started this, I was told it would kind of be the death of my career, even like 12 years ago. Like, oh, you can't go into games and learning. You know, we all know that those are just the violent things, and that's really changed. I think you could always find pockets of people that were open to it. I mean, SimCity's been used off and on for a long time, or Oregon Trail, mostly as kind of in the back of the classroom kind of concerns. But there's always been this, or there had been I think a very strong concern that, and this I should say globally, I think it's very different. We still hear a lot of concerns out of East Asia about kind of play being, I've heard, I should say. Out of play being perhaps antithetical to work or not as serious, or video games being one of the things that's wrong with society. I think in different parts of Europe you have very different opinions in different parts. And in the States, I think there has been a shift though, and I think it's a shift toward trying to engage a generation that is seen as not engaged in schools, and then I think that's a big part of it. And then I think also a general understanding that we need to be, or that there's an opportunity at least, if not need, to be embracing technology in different ways, that the school hasn't changed. And you see a lot of that wrapped up in different language around 21st century skills or communication or whatever. But I think all of those have pointed toward a friendliness to games, and a lot of that's parents getting older and getting a generation that grew up, like the Nintendo generation, having kids and so on.
Well, I believe that games have been embraced by teachers since the very beginning. I don't know of any teacher that doesn't want to make her classroom or his classroom fun and engaging, and we've been using games. It might be Hangman to teach spelling. It could be other role plays. Kids get into it, they learn a lot, and it's very engaging. And I guess the difference or the shift or the tension right now is because we as parents grew up with video games, and at that time it was like Tetris or Pac-Man or things that were really high-level thinking, just repetitive Flappy Bird stuff. And so there are some parents that when you think of video games, we think of that, and we just don't really see how that can be educational. But I think in really recent years that is changing very quickly because, well, in my community, coding is becoming a big deal for primary school kids, and so teachers really don't know how to code. But there's code.org that's entirely game-based, and so my after-school coding club, kids come and play games for the whole hour, and they're learning to program at the same time. And so parents are really thrilled that the kids are learning to code and engaging, and it's a game-based way, and they get badges and things like that. And right now it's an after-school coding club. I think very soon we're going to try and move that into the daytime curriculum. In fact, there's a committee in the International Baccalaureate program that's trying to rewrite the curriculum to incorporate ideas about tech integration and coding, computational thinking into the curriculum. And the big problem is a lot of teachers, we don't have that background. I wish I had computer science background, but I don't. I'm trying to teach myself. So right now there's that tension that we see the value, but we don't know how to deliver it correctly. And like you said, in another generation, when these kids grow up, they'll be amazing, different teachers than ourselves. But because of things like code.org and Scratch programming, parents are starting to realize that game-based learning, video games on a screen, can be very effective, very engaging, and worthwhile learning experiences.
It's something that's kind of interesting to me, following on what Kurt was saying, that there is a change, and some of that change is generational. So you do have the Nintendo generation being parents, and just this kind of core level of comfort with video games and what they really are and can be. There's also kind of another wave happening that I'm seeing with like college-age kids. I'll call them kids. Where I was teaching at a university and talking to those kids about educational games. And they have actually a really positive view of it. They're like, oh, that was one of the best things I did in school, was a couple of the games that a lot of times we view as they weren't very good games, but they're still thought of fondly. And so when I sort of look forward, into that cohort of the population going into the workforce and becoming parents themselves, I think that we're going to see even stronger kind of enthusiasm toward games-based learning.
Cool. And I'd love to backtrack for a moment on Vivian's experiences. So you've mentioned the coding club, different changes in curriculum. Given your child's participation in a collaborative Minecraft group earlier this summer, what were some of the skills that you saw them developing, and what did they enjoy most?
Well, my two boys had quite a lot of experience with Minecraft before. They started the Minecraft camp with Pursuitery, but they did grow a lot through that experience because the server was brand new, and so all of a sudden they were sort of gained some leadership skills because they knew what they were doing, more so than a lot of the newbies, and so they were helping new people that never really built on Minecraft, and they're also watching for griefers and reporting to me, and then I would sort of talk to Pursuitery. So those were leadership and responsibility roles that were new to them. Part of the Pursuitery program was they gave the kids certain challenges in Minecraft to try to meet, and that's different because usually Minecraft is very open play, just do whatever you want. If you want to abandon something halfway, you can. But Pursuitery, encouraged them to rise up and try some new challenges, and so they had to show evidence that they met those challenges, and that brought them into different areas of creating. Before, my boys have made music videos, and they also made videos about their Minecrafting, but then all of a sudden they decided to make a music video of themselves dancing in Minecraft. So that was a remix, and that was a way of them showing evidence of their learning, and by remixing different technology skills together. And I was really proud of one of my boys, 10-year-old. He decided to make an ad for Pursuitery's second session of Camp Minecraft. It just started in September. and we were trying to, get people to join it. And he just on his own made an advertisement trailer and said, well, let's put that on to advertise. And I was really proud because for Sudoring and grateful to them because they put it on their front page to advertise for their programs. So yeah, my boys did learn a lot. They got some leadership skills, and they also saw the program more through a teacher's eye, point of view, because me being a teacher, I was helping them with challenges and encouraging them to help the newbies. And then they sort of saw it from a teacher's point of view, that sometimes it's beneficial to start a project and try to finish it for the badge.
And so, and you spoke to some of the collaborative work as well as the advertising piece. So, were there any concerns when your child was collaborating with others, online or offline, and how did you deal with the concerns of those?
Well, I had very little concerns about the Pursuitery server because they advertised, and you could see right away who the moderators and administrators of the server were, which is quite a wonderful thing for me because I've seen my boys play on Minecraft a lot, and I have no idea who owns the server. And you see sort of interesting Minecraft handle usernames and interesting conversations in the chat window, and so you kind of feel a little bit, worried about what they're up to. But for something like Pursuitery and other educational servers where people are whitelisted and the administrators you see pictures of them, you know who they are, that there's someone up there being accountable for what happens on the server. So that was my entry into Minecraft, is that I felt safe to play on there, that no one was going to troll me or swear at me or do those things to me, and so I could experiment. And so yeah.
Cool. And so, and linking this to say how educational games are designed, and how games are designed in general, when we're looking for intended learning outcomes and how children in the classroom and out of the classroom are benefiting from how video games are evolving over time. Is there anything that you're looking for as a parent or as a teacher that you would want more transparency in, or things that you're really excited about as assessment itself is evolving?
Yeah. Well, that's one big thing I discovered over the summer, is that as adults, we're a little bit hung up about wanting evidence for assessment purposes, and kids, that's not their priority. And so there were a bunch of challenges where they would earn badges, and honestly, my boys weren't that motivated about getting the badges. They just wanted to play, and if they thought the learning engagements, the challenges were fun, they would do them, and they were all fun, but they weren't really hung up about giving me the evidence or Pursuitery the evidence. And so my role as a teacher or parent was to encourage them to show the evidence. And I think that is the tension in education, is kids are learning, they're getting amazing things that we're not aware of, and they're just not really interested in showing evidence. It's not really important to them. And then as teachers, unless we have evidence, it's hard to justify the time we spent on that activity, and to parents. And so where do we sort of find a middle ground where we have to believe that they're learning and trust that they're learning, yet we still have to assess and give some accountability for their time in the classroom and make their parents feel happy if they're paying tuition, or the state happy that the taxes that they're going towards the education budget. So that I can't solve, but it was a great experience for me to see my boys' world, to realize that they're not interested in giving the evidence, but it doesn't mean that there is no learning.
Yeah, I think Vivian just said all of the challenges when it comes to the question that Paula asked. And that's kind of our task in some ways, I think, as educational game developers, is how do we make sure that these products that we're creating aren't just these sort of dark spaces that kids go into where the teacher and the parent don't have any exposure to what's actually going on. Because usually what's going on is really productive and really valuable. But if that isn't unlocked, then it's hard to really know or justify, or for them to be helped. If they're stuck on something, or to be rewarded if they've really picked something up. And that's in many ways the task of Glass Lab, of my organization. And we actually have adopted relatively recently a new motto around this, which is make learning visible. What can we do in our whole software that we're creating to make that visible to everyone who might want to see it, including the student, by the way. Can we give the student a different view on their play experience that wasn't just you won or lost, but actually that you were engaged in these really interesting skills while you were doing it. So yeah, it's a big challenge, but I really think that is the frontier, and actually I think Kurt was kind of referencing that right at the beginning of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. And so, in terms of the best way to engage in game-based learning from parent, teacher, student, what would you say would be the most crucial, or at least in terms of a starting point, especially when we're considering all options in which you can learn? Because everybody learns a different way, be it visually or having it in their hands or listening to it. And this kind of leads into the next question of moderating or controlling or gaining a better understanding of screen time, when is too much, when's too little. What are your thoughts on that, I suppose?
Well, mine is, I guess the biggest thing to keep in mind is just the kind of, I would argue is really your reason for doing it and what you're trying to accomplish. If you look across kind of well, to tell us a quick story, I'd asked a couple colleagues who are up on the retirement, after like 30 or 40 years of doing science education, what did we learn, if anything? And I've heard 2 or 3 people tell me very similar things, which is that oftentimes when you're going to bring an intervention, say, into a classroom, it actually matters far less than you would think what the actual intervention is. And what matters is everyone having a really good shared understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and why, and what the kind of underlying pedagogical goal is. And most often, once you have some sort of agreement between parents, teachers, administration, ideally kids, about what you're trying to accomplish and why, then the rest of it has a much greater chance of working. And so I think that would be kind of my biggest thing, is try to understand what is the core challenge that you're trying to address, both in terms of students' needs and then pedagogically, and then a lot of it hopefully will fall out from there. That's a very non-trivial task too, by the way. Try to get everyone kind of on the same page for what you're trying to do. As a part of that, which I guess is kind of a related thing, is that this one I think is a little more open to future changing, but historically it's really mattered a lot when you use games, how you introduce it and what you do around it. Now that could change as new games come out, and as we develop games that include more and more social context in them and more discussion in the gameplay as a context of play. So that could change, but that would be the other thing, is just thinking about what is the overall encompassing kind of activity that they're doing, and how does that fit into different curricular hooks?
I think that's really interesting, Kurt, and it reminds me of when we were doing some early play testing with kids on our modification of SimCity. And at the beginning, we bring them in and say, hey kids, here's SimCity. And then they would play it and they would give us feedback. And then we would say, with a second group of kids, here's a version of SimCity you're going to play in school. Oh. And the kids' expectations of the experience changed entirely. And actually, they would get angry if they felt it wasn't teaching them enough. When we said the latter case, like I'm not sure what this is teaching me. I'm not sure if I really got enough out of it. Wow. It was really amazing to see this really very very thoughtful educational critique from the kids because they understood the context and they had an expectation of learning out of that. It was really interesting.
Huh.
How did they define like what they were and weren't learning? This is super curious stuff.
Oh well, part of it was some of the things we actually decided not to do. So we had them do some tasks that were around mathematics, and they were sort of, I think that this is kind of a stretch to teach me math, but and then they would sort of go, but I think I learned something really interesting here about how pollution works, and I'd like to tell you about that now, and so it was great, and they totally engaged it as a school tool, and thought of it in those terms.
And so in terms of so that leads to the question then of systems thinking and how these products and these tools in the classroom are kind of being designed. So would you say that there are similar parallels to how like children start to play sports, how they start to learn to be part of a dancing team, start playing like other types of games online? Are these the types of rules when they're created? Do they lead to leadership? Do they lead to behavior change? Vivian, what would you think?
Well, if I hear you correctly, you're just asking how are you going to get kids interested into using games for educational reasons. Is that correct?
Or I guess just similar. So we've all mentioned game-based learning has kind of permeated all throughout how we ourselves learn from infancy all the way to when we're still adults. I mean, I personally still use Tetris whenever I'm camping. So the question, I guess, is of the parallels drawn between game-based learning and other activities, are there specific types of rules or behaviors that you kind of expect that lead to leadership skills or 21st century skills, things like that?
Well, I don't really think there's a huge difference between other games and hobbies and using games in education. I think kids try stuff that looks fun and interesting to them, and then if it is fun and interesting, just get more and more into it. So I don't see a big difference, and I think when you get good at something, you just naturally start to teach other people, hopefully, if you have an empathetic sort of personality. When you learn something, you just naturally want to show other people that don't know how to do it, and that's where your leadership skills come in. And then in all social contexts, kids do run into problems. They're fighting or arguing, and then they also have to learn to negotiate and compromise. And I don't see there being a big difference between sports and video gaming, educational activities, or to me, it's just all childhood stuff, or I don't know, maybe childhood's not the right word, but I don't see them in different boxes, and maybe I'm more open than maybe a lot of people. I don't put video games in one box and playground games in one box and sports and reading in one box. They're all just fun, enriching activities that you get out of it what you put into it. So, and same for students. Encourage them to go towards the activities that challenge them and give them rich, engaging experiences and make them feel good about themselves.
That was something I used to write a little bit about in terms of the Civilization series. So one thing that was interesting about that, like the after-school clubs I used to run with Civ, was that you could get kids who were, I agree, by the way, that it shares a lot in common with those activities, and in some ways, like a multiplayer gaming community also looks a lot like a poker night or something. But with Civilization, what was interesting was that there were kind of two or three forms of leadership that would emerge. One was organizing gameplay for other kids, and this is also like tabletop games. I think is very similar. Sports is, I think also very similar, taking kind of a leadership role. And then also kind of a designing angle as well. And those were relatively, at least what I would see in kids, were oftentimes relatively distinct. But what was also interesting was that playing a game like Civ, unlike those other things, meant that they were developing some forms of academic skills. In this case, again, it was after school and in the context of fun, but that had direct payoff in their classroom. So they would find things like, oh, I know geography better than any of these other kids. And so it started developing a sense of confidence in some of them, not in everybody, but in a substantial portion. That was kind of interesting because they were there just to have fun and like play Civ, and then all of a sudden they find that they pretty much are all set to go in middle school social studies or world geography.
And so you've mentioned that as they go through Civ and as they're exploring these different leadership opportunities and actually self-organizing, do you have any thoughts on how that'll evolve as video games evolve? So in terms of how people decide to interact with each other in and outside of the game, do you think that'll translate?
I think so. I mean, I think Minecraft is the best example we have right now. You know, I was trying to set up a server for my 7-year-old, and I'm, going through these documents made by 12-year-old kids about how to administer a server, and I'm like, good God. And of course, I bet a lot of people have had this where you're cursing and thinking, this is what I, in theory, want. I want an open-ended culture where 12-year-olds are teaching me how to play, and I feel like an idiot. But again, what I'm really most hopeful about, and we'll see if we get there, is that generation, so that we might be able to start to make some games for learning that are more like Minecraft and less like other games, so they're more open-ended. But then also that those kids who've had formative experiences with that start thinking, well, here's how you should learn science. Here I'll create like a sandbox world where you can run experiments on interacting species or something. And I think as we see more and more. I'm hoping we see, and I think there's signs of it. Something we were talking about, I guess, on the side was that these kids I'm seeing, who are 19, 20, who are undergrad, seems totally natural to them. I think MJ is saying the same thing, where they think, well, of course you should be doing that. Why, almost like, here, you step aside, stop talking, and let me just go make some cool stuff. And I'm hoping that generation of developer might kind of lead the revolution soon.
Yeah, I think I was just going to follow to that and say, what Vivian's doing, teaching kids to code, right? This is going to be a big deal. It kind of already is. I mean, in the UK now, software programming is considered part of the core curriculum, and we'll see how that spreads around the world. But yeah, so this idea of kids going from being just the consumers of these games to being the creators of these games, which if you are a long-term creator of the games is kind of terrifying, but also amazing. I think that's actually a really big shift, and it's really, really exciting. So it's to think like, kids are going to come home and be able to show their parents, hey, look at this game I made, and it's about, it's some new version of the Oregon Trail, right? And that'll be, I think, quite a revolution, and it's something I'm really looking forward to, and it's just really cool to hear stories like Vivian's about teaching these kids through games how to manipulate software themselves and how to kind of own the computer.
The big deal for me is the fact that teachers that don't have a computer science background are able to help kids learn to code, and that's because of organizations like Code.org making it completely game-based and self-directed learning. And I think some of maybe the obstacle that we face or parents face and educators face about game-based learning is not really the game, but the fact that we have a disconnect, or we're lacking an ability to connect with that world. And so Code.org has stepped in and sort of fixed that problem to help teachers and parents and adults connect with coding, connect with games, connect with what they're doing. And so now the kids and I, we share a language. But a lot of the maybe skepticism, the fears around game-based learning with video games is that the parents and teachers want to be there, but they aren't there. They don't know how to get there. It seems overwhelming, and that's more of the obstacle to me. So I'm very grateful to things like Scratch programming, Code.org, and for giving adults tools to connect with our kids and have a shared digital experience, I guess you can call it. I had great fun playing with Scratch with my kids and with Minecraft, playing with them. And I think that's one of the great things that can overcome the obstacles if teachers and parents can play with their kids. Because I was just thinking, we encourage parents always to read with their children, and we see teachers reading to the kids and with the kids, and we love that. And now we need to maybe move to another step where we encourage parents to play on the computer with their kids and teachers to play on the computer with their kids, and then we kind of understand each other, and we kind of break down those fears and feelings of inadequacy in adults. And so, yeah.
And are there any other ways in which parents and educators can also communicate with each other? So going beyond like having like a console in your hand, or having just at a mouse click, learning something new you can do. Is there any other way in which we can collaborate and kind of innovate and learn to become more comfortable in that process?
Well, to me, becoming comfortable is playing with your kids. They're the ones that know everything, and they'll teach you, and they'll scold you for being too slow, and then you remember, oh, okay, that's how it feels like when I scold you for being too slow. And so parents are pretty busy, teachers are busy. We don't really make time or have time to collaborate with each other, but we really don't need to collaborate too much with each other. I think learning from our kids is far more efficient, and if not, we can always go on Twitter and ask someone for help. So, yeah, Twitter is a great place for getting help.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really cool, I think, in just straight up mainstream consumer games is a lot of games that can be played cooperatively with kids, even when kids are very young. So Nintendo has done a nice job of this, of making what I like to call asymmetrical cooperative, where the kid is maybe doing something very simple, like just collecting gems or something. Like Mario Galaxy had this great feature for that, while the parent is doing something more sophisticated. And then as the kids sort of catch up, and eventually, as Vivian said, surpass you and make you the slow one, there's still plenty that you can do. And I'm not. I guess I'm a little bit of a Nintendo fanboy, but like. My daughter and I played Kirby's Epic Yarn together in a cooperative mode. It was terrific, and it's such a great way to, first of all, just to have fun with your kids, but also just to see like what's their thought process and their processes when they're playing games, and how do they go through frustration, how do they go through problem solving in a way that you're participating in and you're right there with them. Yeah, I totally agree with Vivian on that.
And Kurt, have you had any experiences with your children in terms of like have you had a chance to play these games with them? How do they respond to frustration? Things like that.
Yeah, where to begin? Yeah, I mean we play a ton together, and I mean I think for me the biggest takeaway really is that it's more or less verified all of this stuff we've been saying for all these years. Just in terms of the value of co-play. So one thing we know from cognitive science in general is that being engaged in a joint activity with someone who's more able, where you both share a common sense of purpose and understanding of the task, and you're engaged in the same thing so you can talk about it together with the adult using hopefully more sophisticated language, is like one of the best things for learning. And I've been shocked at how readily that happens through games. We played like every one of the Lego series. It's got actually really good co-op, I would say. Good to really good, depending. Same with like Skylanders, and it's really amazing. I think it's amazing what a parent or older sibling or anyone can do playing with another child in all of those titles. And I agree that Nintendo does have these moments that just make you realize that there's some real creative geniuses working with some of those mechanics. And again, I think it's one of the real challenges, I think, for us in formal education environments is that we do still generally age segregate. So this is one of the issues we've been working with in some of our games, is trying to create games that intentionally would get, say, a graduate student who's studying the science of lakes and watersheds playing in the same game with a 12-year-old, hopefully in a co-op competitive kind of way, so they can be using information they know about the world strategically in a way that is, mapping to the kinds of domain knowledge, things that we want them to know. It's not easy to do, and you realize as you start doing this that schools to some extent are created in order to keep the outside world out, everything from legal reasons to fears about kids, being exposed to content. And it's really, I think, one of the bigger hurdles for us to truly adopt the ideas of say, game-based learning. I think in some ways the makerspace movement is interesting in that it's tried to build some of those ideas in its core to how sites get set up and reproduce themselves and so on. But it's one of the real challenges we're trying to take on right now in our games, is can we create games that are co-op multiplayer with the idea that it will attract someone who is a more able adult to play with the kid around ideas that are central to the domain.
Yeah, that's a cool problem. Kurt, as you were talking, I was thinking about, there's all these other learning experiences that we as parents engage in with our kids. So maybe I take my kid to the California Academy of Sciences or something, and we wander around the museum, and then I would never just sort of walk out the door and go, huh, right? Like we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna say, what did you think about the alligator? What did you think about that butterfly ecosystem or whatever it was that we saw? So why would you think of games that not the same way? Like we're gonna engage in games together. Like this project that you're talking about sounds amazing, and then outside of that, have the opportunity for this really rich conversation. About whatever it is that was going on, the specific to that instance of it that makes it different from reading a book, and is like this really rich learning experience for kids and sometimes their parents too.
The interesting point I think that you raised that is fascinating is in terms of your experiences and how they are rich experiences and they are really diverse and everybody can respond in an amalgam of ways. What are and you've also mentioned the risks and concerns with having an iterative, real-time immersive gameplay experience in which like anything could theoretically happen, and it's very similar to ways in which people engage with each other in just everyday conversation and things that kind of happen in their daily lives. How do you feel that game-based design, game-based learning will help in terms of like empathy building and adaptation to conflict and things like that? Can you think of any games off the top of your head that may also be useful as like a starting point for parents who want to kind of explore this as well?
Was that to me or is that
This is to everybody.
That sounds like Vivian's Minecraft experience a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think you are starting to see some games that try to do that specifically. We've built 2 out of our lab that try to do some of that, but I think it's one of the kinds of things that games can do just by the virtue of being games, and I think Minecraft's a great example, actually. But again, it really depends, I think, then on how do you kind of seed and construct that community so that you get the right kinds of, or the kinds of social interactions and things that are you ultimately desire, because we all know the other direction that game groups can go.
I think kids worry less about conflict in games than their parents do. I see some stuff in the chat window, it just makes my hair turn white sometimes. They ignore it, they know how to deal with it, and parents fear, trolls and bullying, but honestly, I don't think I've ever heard of a child that's been bullied through an online game, like maybe through Facebook or Twitter, but not on an online game situation. And I think kids, at least my kids they have a thick skin, and they just, a lot of stuff they say to each other they forget about, or they ignore a lot of stuff. And the conflict, I don't see them feeling as conflicted about it as parents and teachers are. And I think that's because they're exposed to a lot of it while they're playing. So.
MJ, perhaps you can speak to how kind of Mars Generation 1, Argubot Academy, a game that just went live through GlassLab, NASA, and the National Writing Project. There's mechanics in which people gather evidence to make arguments and battle using robots. Do you have any sort of anecdotes to share with how children have kind of created their arguments, and how has that impacted their ability to kind of resolve conflict in that sense, or at least identify conflict?
Yeah, or create conflict. We did this game that you're mentioning. It's Mars Generation 1 Argubot Academy, an iPad game, and it's meant to teach kids how to structure arguments using like one of the main elements is if you make a claim, you have to support that claim with valid evidence. And so the game is actually based around that as its core mechanic. And my daughter has been a extensive playtester of that, and now feels free to challenge my claims about when she should go to bed or take out the trash with absence of valid evidence, and it's been a little bit of a challenge. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think what's interesting is she'll see a comparable situation. So somebody says something on television, or somebody's making some kind of an argument, and she'll say, but that argument doesn't have evidence, and that's just like that game that I played. And so it's kind of neat to see, and this is this is an anecdote of one, right? And we're doing research to see how broadly this works, but it definitely has the opportunity to change the way she views how people are speaking, and how their arguments are coming together or not coming together, and whether or not she should consider them credible. It's pretty powerful, and there's something about the game that makes it sticky, that makes it something that she kind of can always refer back to in her head.
And Kurt, do you have any experiences in terms of just so you mentioned that there's a lot of experiences now in which they're kind of becoming the master, and you setting up a server and having to follow very interesting direct instructions from a 12-year-old. Do you feel like as gaming evolves in the future, parents themselves will also have the opportunity to kind of design with their kids? Are you excited? Are you nervous about anything dealing with that? Is it a black hole?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think you nailed it. I think I think I would say is that I was much more concerned. If we had had this conversation 3 years ago or 5 years ago, I might have been more concerned that that thread of gaming and gaming culture might be dying a little bit. I think particularly I'd say games have gone from the PC to the console, and modding, and even things like like tabletop games. I would have said this, but hang with me for a second. Like things like tabletop games. Or I was a big mudder. One of my experiences, some of you may have heard me talk about, was when I would mud as a teacher with my kids, like in the early '90s, and the kids designed a couple kids designed an area. One of them turned it in for his classwork, and he had turned in, like, as a 5th grader, like 65 pages of an area he designed, and the other kids were playing it. And that kind of thread in gaming culture seemed a bit at risk. And then, with Minecraft, it feels like everything's kind of blown up, and all of those things are kind of alive and well. And I think it's very easy now for me to imagine that happening. And there's other threads, of course, as well. But I think Minecraft really shone just a giant thread on that, a spotlight on that, sorry. But yeah, I mean, I think that things like Kodu, GameStar Mechanic, there are other games that are meant to be games where you create games that are great, but I think hopefully you're going to see more of that open-ended gaming and tools for creating mods or modding games on whichever platform continue to thrive. So I'm personally really encouraged, and I think back to some earlier comments that maybe others have made, is that I think that it does also remind you that we design games for our kids all of the time. When you're playing tag or you're playing basketball with your kid, and you say, all right, well, I'm going to only shoot left-handed, and you try to design an entertaining experience. So I think it is also just a core thread of human experience. But I do think tools are going that way in a very positive way.
And so we are 8 minutes from the top of the hour, so I want to provide the opportunity for anybody else who's still listening and interested in actually asking a question or providing commentary on everything that's been said so far. Please feel free to send out your message through the hashtag Connected Learning or through our Google Plus community. And so as an interesting closing thought perhaps is what can parents of students see or need to see or hear in order to accept video games as something that's more than a form of entertainment and another resource or tool for engagement and for learning?
I'm just going to make it really simple. I think people need to hear, come and play with me this game. Spend an hour with them, and they'll be convinced. Try Minecraft. When I'm on Minecraft, it's pretty pathetic, but I see my kids using perimeter and length and area and spatial skills, and they just bang, 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 and they just can turn shapes like crazy. And yep, spend an hour, come and play with me this game, Minecraft or Scratch programming or Code.org or some of the peace simulation conflict games. Spend an hour with me and you'll be convinced.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to top that, Vivian. Play with your kids, and then the other thing is, just sort of expand on that is, so in so many ways, games like learning games are an opportunity for conversation. And if you've played that game and if you've watched your kid do this amazing thing, can you say, hey, do you realize that you were doing perimeter and area there? Because that's what you were doing. And that, taking it a step further, kids will be probably very glad that you're engaging them on their level and doing that. The other thing is kind of just to reference what I was saying earlier is I think this is also a task that sits on the shoulders of the developers of these software products to say, we're going to put features into our software that make it more visible and easier for the teachers, but also the parents to see and believe and trust what's going on inside the game.
And Kurt, do you think that language will kind of evolve over time as video games kind of start to become, or shifting perceptions of video games as beyond forms of entertainment? Do you think that there's going to be a way in which we can bridge that language gap, just learning how to talk about it or speak to someone else about it, if not directly play it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to some extent, I feel like we've maybe crossed that tipping point. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's tough. I guess it's tough to say, and it's always important to remember that there are many different circles out there of influence. But I know in Wisconsin, where this statewide, this idea, we were not the first state to embrace this sort of idea. I've seen a real shift among educators. We now have a couple hundred teachers we work with, and a lot of parents, and it's more the exception now when you feel like you have to kind of explain why this would be an idea that works. And I think that you can't really predict the future, but I do think one thing that I would just keep everyone in mind is that really is there are some signs that that the way that global education is going to move forward in the next, certainly by 10 years, could be wildly different than how it is now. As we look at digital distribution, digital devices being more ubiquitous, and then we look at kind of the emergence of global markets, could lead to some very different sorts of products and niches and learning experiences that you just would not have thought of before. When you start looking at like on the more businessy side, the things that we've been working with, going into I guess emerging markets and then bringing some of those ideas back, you start to get some economies of scale that are really unique and could let you do some really interesting things as designers.
What are the interesting things that you or MJ or Vivian, this question to everybody, think could be really interesting as those economies of scale kind of expand and grow?
Yeah, Kurt, what are you seeing overseas that we should know about?
Are there any trends that are emerging?
Well, let's just say I would just say that as that global market, as we start to look at things that look like a global market, kind of some of the things that we're seeing are that you can start to think about even just like say a math game or a physics game, and you look at what the economics are of doing it for certain segments in the U.S. versus global, and particularly on mobile devices. Mobile devices is one of the big ones, and games for assessment is a big one. Is a big one that we're seeing a lot of opportunity. It's one thing to try to sell a game for assessment in America on a couple of devices. It's another thing to try to do it, maybe say in let's say China or India, where you just the market realities are very different, and then that theoretically could also just allow you to bootstrap and then also bring things back to the United States and so on. Similarly, though, I think there are other areas that our lab's been doing a lot of work in mindfulness and so-called non-academic skills. We've been doing a lot in that, a lot of, again, in assessment, a lot in telemetry, work in language learning. I think those are all areas I would think you're probably going to see. And then computational thinking, as Vivian said, which I think is huge, and it is another good example where it's a great example actually, maybe where the rhetoric is in one place in the United States, and it may be in a very different place globally, and you could see some things emerge in different markets.
Well, it looks like we have a lot to look forward to. So we're about to hit the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for having an amazing conversation. Well, to everybody watching in the audience, we'll have a full video recording of this webinar available immediately on www.connectedlearning.tv, as well as other curated content on the way that you can share with your own network. This wraps up the final webinar of our month-long series, but that doesn't mean our conversations have to end here. We encourage everyone to keep the energy going by using the Twitter hashtag Connected Learning, and by getting involved in the ongoing game-based learning conversations within the Connected Learning Google Plus community. If you'd like to know about upcoming webinars or other Connected Learning highlights, visit www.connectedlearning.tv and sign up for the email newsletter. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.